Welcome to the Manual Channel. I'm your host, Dan Gaul. Joining us today is Owen King, co-founder and head distiller of Ironclad Distillery and Ironclad Inn and Bourbon Tasting Room. But before we get started, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe, and sign up for notifications and show your support. All right, let's do this. Owen, thanks for joining me. How you doing?
Doing great, Dan. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm really excited to get to know more about you and Ironclad. Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your role at Ironclad?
My name's Owen King. I'm the distiller at Ironclad Distillery. The distillery started 10 years ago now, which is crazy to think about that how quickly the time has flown past. But yeah, so I every single bottle of bourbon if you've ever tried any Ironclad has been made by me, and it's we've never sourced a drop or anything like that. But yeah, so my whole job is to make sure the stuff in the bottle tastes good. So that's what I kind of pride myself in. I also like to try to do some fun things that uh, hopefully no one else has thought of, or at least if someone else has done, maybe I can improve upon it. But yeah, it's just the that's the fun part of the job, is trying to find something new and something different that no one else has done. And so yeah, it's a very exciting. It's the best part of my job, and yeah, that's what I get to do every day.
You mentioned you never sourced a drop. So that is really interesting for kind of like a I feel like nowadays, I don't know about historically, but nowadays, people usually source maybe the first couple of years as they get maybe a production down, or it takes a while to age at least, right? Especially bourbon, right? So how were you able to do that?
Well, I can say this: I don't recommend starting a business this way. It definitely made it harder on us than we needed it to be. But it's a kind of cool little feather in our cap that we get to go and say, hey, every single drop has been made by us. And so we started the distillery. We started very, very small. And again, this is another mistake we made. Like, looking back, obviously, you can hindsight's always 2020. You can look at, like, why do we do that? And so we started with 6 26-gallon stills. So essentially, we had a 125-gallon still, which for even a craft distillery, that's still very, very small. And so we were running those stills. We were just kind of hoping that the first stuff that would come off and age would be good. And we were kind of prepared to wait a year, 14 months, 15 months for that first few batches to be ready, because we weren't one of those distilleries that wanted to release a clear, whether it be a vodka, a rum, or a gin. So we waited and we waited and we waited. And while we were waiting, we were laying down more and more whiskey. And as it progressed, we were tasting it along the way. And I think that first barrel was maybe half as full as what it should have been by the time it was done, because the not the angels were thirsty, but also the kings were thirsty. Um, so tasted along the way, and yeah, we were just very lucky that when it first came out, it tasted good. And so we were very proud of it. We sent it off, and we it bottled up, sent it off, and it people liked it, and so far people have continued to like it. So it's been great.
That's a classic entrepreneurial story, is making a lot of mistakes and learning from them. Because there's only so much you learn from trying to read books or online or for mentors, etc. A lot of it is just from doing, right? And sounds like you've got some great experience.
Yeah, I mean, trial and error is the greatest learning tool in the in the distilling world, because inevitably something will happen. And you'll just be like, "Oh, all right, well, let's not do that again," or or "Oh, that actually worked out really well. Let's do that again." So yeah, it's constant. Hey, actually, let's figure this out. Okay, yeah, that didn't work, or yeah, that did work.
How did you like become a distiller? Like, how did you learn? Was this something you've been doing for a while before Ironclad, or was it something you dropped into?
So it was this. I mean, the distillery itself, it was a drunken idea, which there are really great drunken ideas, and there are less great drunken ideas. This I would categorize this as a great drunken idea, but when I was in college, I just happened to take a gen ed course that was a chemistry class. It was Chemistry 101. And so for the first half of the semester, we had to learn general chemistry. So, periodic table, all those other parts of chemistry. I've forgotten about all those. But the second part of the chemistry class, the class got to pick what chemistry lessons we wanted to learn. And he gave us this whole list of things that we wanted, that we had an option of. And the three things our class chose were brewing, distilling, bread making. All that has to do with fermentation, and happens to be brewing and distilling is exactly what I do almost every day. Because bourbon is just distilled beer. I always like to say we make beer and then we make beer better. It was very rudimentary information, but it was just something I had that I learned about, and I was like, okay, now I know that if I ever want a home brew or something like that. And then when I came down to work for my dad, we were sitting around at night talking about, what are we going to do with all this extra space we have in this big warehouse we have. And the one thing we kept coming back to is because we'd be sitting around drinking bourbon, he'd be like, how hard could it be to make bourbon? And I was like, well, actually, I took a class about this. I kind of know how to do that. Didn't really know. I just acted like I thought I knew. And so we were kicking, every weekend we'd be sitting around drinking bourbon, and he'd be like, we could do this. We could do this. And we could have a whole bunch of barrels just aging on the third floor, which would be a great spot for them. And we could just sit there and wait for that stuff to get great, and then we could sell it. It would be so cool. And I was like, yeah, that's a total sane thing to say. Or I'm sure how many other people have been sitting around drinking bourbon saying that exact same thing.
Yeah.
And then one day I walked into work. It was a Monday morning. He's like, hey, by the way, I bought a still. And I was like, okay, great. We're bootleggers now. And so we waited, the still eventually came in, which was a little 26-gallon hobby still made by Hillbilly Stills in Kentucky. And so when it came in, we are like, okay, what do we need to do to not go to jail? And so we looked through and got all of our licenses and permits and everything like that, which at that time took us about a year. And then once we got it up and running, we started the distillery. And during that time of getting the paperwork and X's, our I's dotted and T's crossed, we were going to meet farmers to see who was close that could grow the grains for us that we wanted, and sourcing out where we wanted to get our malt from, and finding cooperages. With all that time, we got to utilize it for figuring out where getting all the other ducks in a row to make bourbon.
Yeah. So the moment that you guys got your licenses and permits, you were ready to go.
We were already in the right spot, be ready to start, hit the ground running, making bourbon.
Yeah. So, and it also sounds like, this is a pretty cool story, because it sounds like you kind of were making bourbon so that you could drink bourbon, right? But also at the same time,
it was 100% selfish reasons. 100%.
Yeah. And was it like you were like, we need to figure out how to make money and let's do bourbon, right? Like, go, wow, we're stuck in it now.
No, it was 100% selfish reasons. If it made money, that was just icing on the cake. That was even better.
That's amazing. How has it changed from those early days to now 10 years later? What's been the progression?
I was at a bourbon pairing dinner last night that this restaurant was running, and people were asking me that same question. And going into this, I expected it just to be a little bit more than a hobby. I mean, when we first expected, we were like, we'll have some stuff for us, and we'll sell some to friends and family. And if we have extra, we'll distribute in the state of Virginia. We don't really want to go much further than that, because we don't see this bigger company than where we were at with it. We started doing that, and then we're like, people liked it, and so every time someone liked it, we're like, well, maybe we're doing something right here. And so as we were going, then we're like, well, if people like it, and it's doing well, maybe we should up production a little bit. And so then we bought a 500-gallon still. So now, increased our distilling fivefold. That, changed it drastically. Then we had a tasting room built in Newport News, which was awesome, and that had a really big turnout. People were coming in, and people were from traveling from around the country, or at least were in the area from other parts of the country, and they saw our name and came to see us. And then just recently we opened up a second tasting room in Fredericksburg, that is a bed, breakfast, and bourbon to really complete the whole immersion into the bourbon culture. So did I think we were going to own a bed and breakfast when we first started this? Did I think we were going to have two tasting rooms in the state of Virginia? Did I think we were going to be distributed in 9 different states in Europe? No, I didn't see that coming at all. But it's been great. I mean, I've gotten to meet really awesome people. I've gotten to drink some really awesome bourbon. I've gotten to share bourbon with some really amazing people, which is the best part about it. Where I get to, I mean, we always say that nothing pairs better with bourbon than a good story, and so that's kind of the best part of this is I get to sit down and sip bourbon with really cool people. I mean, like you, Dan, and we can sit here and talk about whiskey, which is honestly one of my favorite topics to talk about.
I mean, honestly, this is why I love doing interviews like this, is that every person in this industry has something amazing to share, an amazing background, great stories. And that leads into my next question, which is, what is the story of the name Ironclad? Like, where did you guys come up with it? What was the inspiration of that?
So, if you're familiar with your Civil War history, we have March 9th, 1862 was the day that changed naval warfare forever. So that was the date of the battle between the USS Monitor and the CSS Virginia. Those were the first two ironclad ships. The USS Monitor was built in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, and the CSS Virginia, which was originally the USS Merrimack, which was taken by the Confederacy. And then when they heard about the Monitor being built, they knew they were going to be outclassed, so they had to take this wooden hulled ship and clad it in iron, so they had an equal ship that could, go toe to toe with the Monitor. So our distillery actually sits, or had our distillery been there on March 9th, 1862, we would have had a front row seat to watch the whole battle go down. So when we were coming up with names, we were looking at the original spelling of Newport News. We were thinking of other things to kind of tie in our King family name, but we really love sharing history and where our distillery sits, where we are in Virginia. It's an incredibly historical area, and so we thought, Ironclad would be a really cool name for a bourbon, and so we went with Ironclad. And then years later, we were talking to a historian, and they wrote a book about the Monitor in the Virginia. And it turns out in the 1890s, there was actually a rye whiskey brand made in upstate New York called Monitor Blend Bourbon, which we have a bourbon like that in our portfolio, our list of whiskeys. And so we just thought it was super cool that we're not the first people to think about naming a whiskey brand after the Ironclad. So it was just fortuitous or a little fun little coincidence.
Yeah, I'm assuming that Monitor whiskey might have got put under by the whole Prohibition era or something like that.
100%. It did 100%.
Have you ever looked at, hey, maybe it'd be cool to revive the recipe? Could you find that recipe?
I don't. I can't even find the distillery that made it. I've seen the advertisement. And maybe it was just some farmer that was that was making it because he had a whole bunch of extra rye that from a crop. But no, on the advertisement it doesn't list the distillery. It's just called Monitor Blend Rye Whiskey.
He made it out in the woods somewhere along a stream.
It was probably pretty fine whiskey too.
Yeah, it'd be fun to find some. There's some really, again, going back to interesting stories. Like, if you ever have you ever heard of Nelson Greenbrier?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that I find their story really interesting because it was lost and then they
Yeah.
refound it, found an original recipe from the family, and
Yeah.
started remaking it. That's like so cool.
Yeah.
I love the story of Ironclad too. I mean, being West Coast, born on the West Coast, I feel like that kind of history is not necessarily shared throughout the region here, but you do learn about it, especially during the Civil War and how the Ironclads turned. They were a huge part of turning the war as well, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, after that battle, you could never build another ship out of wood because it was immediately outclassed.
Yeah. And it's a kick ass, kind of like, hopefully your bourbon's kick ass, right?
That's
Uh,
right.
and then from a bread and breakfast, that's at bread, breakfast, bourbon tasting room. Really, really interesting. So, if we get into real quick, why bread and breakfast, and then who's running that? Because you're the distiller. It sounds like you have two tasting rooms, not just one. So this is a family-run business, right?
Yeah.
So why the bread and breakfast? Who's running it, and how is it working with your family?
I'll start with how is it working with family? And the one nice thing about working with family is that you're obligated to love these people. So that we if we have disagreements, I've known my sister for 36 years now. I've known my dad for 36 years. So we all know how each other works, and if it gets to a boiling point, we can all step away, take a few hours, and then okay, we're all part of the same greater good. We all want the same thing. So it's that that part makes it pretty easy. Because we're already tied together. We're not going to separate all out. So that working with family is great. So that being said, with the bed and breakfast in Fredericksburg, make it into a bourbon experience. So it's not 100% there as far as everything we want done in the rooms is ready, but it's 90% there. We have these great not we have 9 great rooms there. We have our breakfast, which we're serving our pancakes or waffles with our bourbon barrel aged maple syrup, and then we also have our tasting room that's open downstairs that has our cocktails and everything. So when you're ready to have a drink, whether you're ready to go out or whether you've just done a little hike or walk down to the river, you can come out and have your drink and get ready for the day. And you can take it up to your room, all that stuff, which is the goal. We want it to be a bourbon immersion experience. So when you're there, you're getting to really dive into tasting whiskey, learning the proper way to taste whiskey. If you want to learn how to make a cocktail, we'll teach you. We have multiple bottles there available as well. So all of that is just to kind of our next step up where the bigger guys in Kentucky, they all have a lot of them now have Airbnbs on their properties, so that you can do a similar thing that we are, that's our goal. So that was the idea behind the bed and breakfast, is to make sure that make it into more of an experience, because experiences, in my opinion, are what more people want. They want to. They don't if they're going to spend money, they want to spend it on something that's going to leave them a lasting memory, not something that's you're going to have it for 5 minutes and then you forget about it 10 minutes later.
100%. I think with alcohol, no matter what it is a uh, well, I would say like bourbon is an experience of tasting, but it leads to other things, right? Like same with like wine or beer. You're usually doing something around it, and or even storytelling. So it's getting experience out of the experience of the drink, right? So even if it's a horrible one, you're like, oh my God, like this is still an experience. It tells a story. You get something to share. But if it have and an amazing one, it's interesting. You said these the other distillers out of like Kentucky, they're doing their own Airbnbs and things like that. That experience to me is really more around experiencing that property and the farm and whatever, but doing it in Fredericksburg and in Virginia, where it's a part of the community, right? I think is a little not a little bit. It's a big separation, I would think, and the history there is so much greater that there's a lot more stories tied around it than just being one, which is just the distillery, right?
Yeah, that's the whole goal is we want to tell the history of Fredericksburg as well that ties in to because the bed and breakfast that we have was built 1793. So that alone tells a story. I mean, it was inherited by George Washington's sister. When it was built, George Washington was on his second term of as president. So it's just crazy to it was hit by cannon fire in the Battle of Fredericksburg. So it is even when you're just walking into the bed and breakfast, you're already walking into history. It's a I mean I our history in America is much younger than Europe, but 1793 is still old in America.
That
It's old.
is that is so old. Again, West Coast much newer than East Coast, and you know, it's so like going to the East Coast to Virginia, the Carolinas, and seeing these old structures that are still standing. It's for me, it's kind of awe-inspiring. Like this,
Yeah.
I'm standing in front of something that, especially timber, if it's timber made, right? And going,
Yeah.
this thing is still standing. I can't believe it, right?
Yeah.
Um, so are you planning on doing more bed and breakfast and how it sounds like from what you're saying is that this is a fairly newer endeavor of yours.
Yeah, so we just opened the bed and breakfast about 4 months ago. So there's more things that we want to do with that bed and breakfast and those things being, we want to put a phone in every single room so that uh, when you're there in your room, if you want a cocktail, we can run a cocktail up to you. We want to call it the bourbon phone. It's similar to the bat phone, but way cooler.
Yeah.
Because there's bourbon on the other end. And then we also want to offer, we want to make it a full bourbon immersion experience. So we want there to be bottles in every room. We want to tie more bourbon things into the room. So it's a work in progress still, but it's getting closer and closer to getting completed as we go on. But we've only had it for a short amount of time. So um,
Speaking of bourbon, so what sets Ironclad apart from other bourbons on the market? You mentioned earlier that you experiment with a lot of different things, and I'm curious, like what is that?
so you know, bourbon is been made the same way since they made the first drop of corn liquor in uh, James City County back in 1726 by George Thorpe. Everyone comes out there and says we're going to change the way bourbon's made, and you really can't because there's a lot of stringent rules about how to make bourbon. The one thing I want to do is I want to make sure that bourbon's done the right way. So the thing that matters the most to me is I want to make sure that if we're making bourbon, I want to use local ingredients because that would be the way they were doing it. You weren't sourcing grain from, we weren't getting corn from Texas. We were getting corn from, and maybe 45 minutes away, because that's the way it would have been done. Same with wheat and rye. Malted barley we can get from locally sourced as well. So all of our stuff can come from an hour radius around the distillery, which is very important. And as we were coming along, I was really hoping we could finally get a cooperage to use Virginia oak. And then a couple of years ago, a cooperage opened up in Virginia, and I was like, okay, well, guess what? I know, and now I know where my cooperage is going to come from, and they've been very helpful and making the barrels to the specifications that I want them made in. So that's been going really well of like tweaking things here and there of making sure that the barrels can be as great as I want them to be. And the Cooperage's Space Side, they do an awesome job. Those are the things that I was really passionate about. I wanted to make sure we were showcasing local agriculture. I wanted to make sure we were showcasing Virginia made goods. And so if we could continue to do that, then I was gonna make sure that if you can do those things right, then hope the bourbon should come out right too. And so those were the things that I was really passionate about to make sure we were doing those things to make the best bourbon we could possibly make.
Awesome. I'm excited to try it. And you sent me some samples. I've kept it in the packaging here, just to make it kind of unique for me, an expansion. By the way, this packaging is I don't know how you got this box in this uh air
You
tube thing.
have to inflate. You put it in before you inflate. That's the trick.
Oh, so you got it. Oh, do you ship out like that frequently? Is that
Yeah.
something you do
So
in house? Okay.
yeah. So that was all packed up lovingly by me.
I love it. Thank you. And I also love honestly the anchor with the 1862 on there. That's awesome.
Yeah. So
And little
the
waves.
the monitor itself had a very unique anchor shape, and it was the four-prong anchor. And so we gave that to we have my brother, my sister and I have an older brother. He's a graphic designer, and he designed our column of our still sticker for you. Yeah,
Thank
the
you.
column of our still with the anchor to tie in. So it was just that's kind of like our logo that we thought would be really cool. I'm always really proud of it because I think he did an awesome job with it.
Yeah, it looks great. And so I've got 5 bottles here.
Yep.
I appreciate it. Um, which one should I try first? And are you gonna partake with me? Or are you good?
I can go run down and get a bourbon. I'm at my house right now, so yeah, I can definitely partake with you. The first one should be the Monitor blend.
The straight
Uh,
bourbon number one.
all right, straight bourbon's where we're starting then.
All right.
So this one is our straight bourbon, which is our flagship mash bill, which is our 4 grain mash bill, which is 70% corn, 10% wheat, 10% rye, 10% malted barley. This is 100 proof. Um, it's a little over 3.5 years old. Uh, so this one with it, you'll get that nice kind of oakiness on the front end. And then as it finishes across the back of your palate, you'll get this nice little cinnamon pop at the end. So since it's a 4 grain, it's got a lot of corn, it's got a lot of wheat, and so that gives that softness, sweetness, and then that cinnamon kind of baking spice at the end. That's where the rye kind of pops in on you. Also, cheers.
Here, sorry, I started without you.
You're fine. I'm here.
So I learned a new tasting technique from my previous guest, Eddie from Wolves Whiskey,
Oh,
which
nice.
which is a three
Yeah,
the three quick tastes. He uses a wine glass, which I wanted to try today. I've never used a wine glass because I really wanted to be able to smell and experience it in a different way than what I've always done in the past. So first off, uh, I'm gonna have to do another quick taste, but it's really soft. I would say like there's not a lot of like heat, burn, hit right up the front. The nose for me is um, actually kind of oaky up front
yeah,
when I smell it. And I totally get that cinnamon. It reminded me of hot tamales almost, but not like spicy, like
yeah,
but that cinnamon flavor coming through.
yeah.
Really good.
Thank
Uh,
you.
is this so this being the straight bourbon 100 proof, is this like your go-to kind of to the market? Like,
Our flagship bourbon is our small batch bourbon, and it's a 90 proof bourbon that is the same mash bill. It's just aged in 15-gallon barrels, and those 15-gallon barrels usually go 14 to 16 months. So this is the the older brother of the small batch. This is the one I drink the most of. I love our straight. There's certain milestones you hit when you become a distillery. So obviously when you sell your first bottle, that's a milestone because you finally sold whiskey. The second milestone is when you can put the word straight on the label because that means your distillery has survived for 2 years. And then the milestone after that is when when you hit bottled and bond, which means you've made it 4 years and you're so like there's the elevations of the tiers of bourbon making. And so this is our straight, which is the one when I finally made it, I was like, oh God, we made a straight bourbon. This is amazing. And then of course we have a bottled and bond now as well, which I love.
what do
But
you get at 10 years?
so 10 years, I don't know. I'm going on a vacation to somewhere. I We've obviously made it to 10 years. We just don't have a 10-year-old bourbon yet.
I also get the sweet kind of oat smell up front on this as well, right?
Yeah, I can
What do
see
you
that.
get? What do you guys kind of teach people about the notes and the taste on this?
Well, I always say that, taste is so subjective. And so I could tell you a million things, and just because I'm telling you them, you will taste them.
Hmm.
Because the power of suggestion is a very powerful way, a very powerful descriptor. And so I always just like to say, I can tell you what I taste, and just because I say it doesn't mean it's necessarily right. But that's what I enjoy about doing whiskey tastings is, will try to keep everything to myself, and then as someone else describes it, I'll be like, okay, yeah, I can see that, but like, here's what I'm getting. I'm getting peanuts on this one, and you're getting bubble gum. Like, or we're pretty far off, but it's okay. So our palates aren't necessarily aligned, but then there's some where you're like, okay, yeah, I'm getting these notes of bright red starbursts, and someone's like, yeah, I totally get that. So it's that says, yeah, that's what I enjoy so much about whiskey tasting is you can talk about things like that too.
Yeah, that is that the social aspect of talking about it itself, what you're tasting, what you're smelling. It's so that is actually something that I really enjoy too, which is why I love doing tastings, through these interviews as well, because in doing that with you, doing it with friends, it's part of that experience of
Yeah.
sitting down and enjoying a whiskey or a bourbon or whatever it might be. What's next? A number two bottle for me is the bottled in bond bourbon.
So there we
But
go. This is the older brother to the straight. So this would be a great one, a great next one to go with. And this one is a really cool description of like how age makes a difference in whiskey. So the straight was 3.5 years old at 100 proof. The bottled and bond is 5 years old at 100 proof. So same recipe, same oak or same, similar barrels, but this one is now, you know still a year and a half older than the other one. So I would say much more pronounced oak on this one on the nose.
yeah.
I would also go, and then on the palate, it's still going to have that nice softness. It rounds it out a little bit more because now you're not going to maybe you don't get that bright that cinnamon flavor. I think you're going to get much more baking spice, nutmeg, clove, cinnamon, maybe.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, this is just I love this one.
You know what's interesting is that my first smell of this was definitely still heavy oak, but it's warmer and actually heavy. It feels heavier. Uh, Warm is such a weird descriptor, but especially from a nose perspective, but it just feels more full
No,
and warm.
I totally can see that. I mean, I think warmth is a smell. It's like a fire. You can smell that warmth.
Yeah. The other interesting thing is I can't bury my nose. Like there's a lot more heat, kind of at least from a nose perspective, right?
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna cheers to you. I don't know if you have this one with you, but cheers.
Cheers.
A little hotter. You get same proof,
But
but a
same proof
little,
though. Yeah.
yeah, a little hotter. It coats my tongue so much more. I get a heat, more of a heat across my tongue, not from like the alcohol, but like more of a spice, right?
The one thing I notice more about this one is it's got more of an oily mouth feel to it, or more viscosity to it, where it's really it's so much more robust of a flavor because it's got that more time in oak, which I think makes a big difference.
Yeah, and then the cinnamon you mentioned, not so much of a hot tamale, but it's more integrated into the flavor instead of standing out. Like the straight bird. Sorry, my mouth is totally just like wet right now.
Yeah.
The straight bourbon was more like oak and then cinnamon and like progressed like a walk, and this is more like everything's jumping right at me all at once. And then the oil, like you were talking about, coating the tongue is just lasting and lingering for sure, which is I think contributing to that feeling of yeah, it's lasting. It's awesome.
Yeah.
you're gonna get me drunk, man. I swear to God.
Unfortunately for you, it's only 11 o'clock.
I know. I'm not gonna be able to drive to get lunch. I'll have to figure something out here at home. Hmm. I really like that. It's so smooth up front. Like as my mouth gets kind of more like the shock is worn off, and just that oil the oils up front, which I think helps make it really smooth, and then just that again that collaboration between the cinnamon baking spice, there is for me still the oak and maybe a subtle hint of the oats still. Your straight one definitely had for me some sweet oats in there coming out. All right, we got a lot more to go through. We're not even halfway, so I'm going to keep going. Ironclad Betrayal Rye, 100
So this
proof.
this is our rye. So I this is what I'm currently sipping on over here. And so this one, the Betrayal Rye, I don't know how many other 4 grain ryes there are out there. And so this is a 4 grain rye. So it's 70% rye, 10% corn, 10% wheat, 10% malt. And it's made with an Abruzzi rye. So my family, my mother's mom was from Abruzzi, Italy. So I was making sure that I was sourcing Abruzzi rye because that's where that varietal rye came from. So this one was kind of like I love rye so much, and I wanted to make a rye. But our marketing, my sister's side said, we will only even make bourbon. It's our ironclad rule. And so I was like, okay, I guess we won't do that. And then finally, I was like, I'm making a rye. I'm just going to do it. And so I didn't tell her about it for a very long time. And then after I'd made it, it was about a year and a half in. I was talking to someone, and they're like, "Yo, when are you going to make a rye?" I was like, "Oh, I actually did make a rye." And my sister goes, "You did what?" And I was like, "Oh, I guess yeah, I made a rye." And she's like, "Oh, well, you betrayed me. Thanks so much." And I was like, "Well, I guess we figured out the name for the bourbon or name for the rye. It's going to be called Betrayal."
I love that. What a great story, man. And you know what? That ties in the family, like little, like the question I alluded to earlier, what is the hard things and the things that are advantages and, like you're getting crap from your sister about going behind her back. Yeah, I love it. You know what? Right off the bat, just sniffing it, I smell that rye, like straight up, like rye nose.
So this one, the one I mean, what I this is a Pennsylvania style rye. That's where I'm originally from, and so it means it's a very high rye in the mash bill. And so I wanted this to be minty because I love minty ryes, and then I also wanted it to be slightly chocolatey to kind of change up a little another dimension to it. And so we actually use a dark roasted malt on this one as well. So this one, when you taste it, you'll get that mintiness up front. You'll get some more florality in it as well. And then as it finishes off, you'll actually get this little hint of chocolate at the
I
end.
I smell that mint too, man. And thank you for giving me those because I know like it's an experience for each of us, but for me sometimes I have a hard time identifying those smells, right? I'm not a som or anything like that. So like when you said minty, yep, I smell mint with that rye. I'm super excited. By the way, what was the name of the rye that you're using?
So it's called a Bruzzi rye.
A Brucey. And that's grown locally, but an Italian grain, right?
Correct. Yep. So it's an Italian grain, but a lot of farmers grow it. A lot. It's mostly used for a cover crop. And I now have a couple farmers who grow it for me specifically just for this rye.
They're using rye for cover crop, huh?
It's a great cover crop because it puts a lot of nutrients back into the soil.
Yeah. And then you get a benefit of like, hey, I can use that. Don't just like,
Yeah,
cut it down
exactly.
and let
It
it
doesn't. It doesn't even
decompose.
tilt. It doesn't even tilt back into the yard
Yeah,
or
yeah.
into the field.
This is great. So like I took a sip. I'm sorry without you already. I get that oil again, like coating my tongue. I get the rye. Definitely the mint. I think my palate is shocked right now. Not from this. Although I do get like again, kind of like that spiciness a little bit on that on the tail end, right? Like, and it's lingering for sure. It smells so good. Like I'm not usually I love ryes as a drink. I don't like ryes as a bread, which is kind of weird. I don't know if that's weird or not, but for me, I
No,
don't like rye.
so rye as a bread is very different than rye as a distillate. Because it's so much more. I mean, rye as a distillate it has so much more florality to it and more mintiness to it, and all these other notes to it. Now, rye as a bread is going to be super dense and much more aggressive.
Yeah, and this is more like the smell is good. Like it's actually rye bread smells really good too, I think. It's just
Yeah,
for me the palate doesn't do me
yeah.
any favors, but this is great. I love it. Is this so you're drinking this now? Is this also one of your favorites that you make?
So this is a once a year release for us. We because I can't fit a ton of rye into the schedule of distilling because I have to make so many I have to make bourbon so much to keep up with the demand. So yeah, this is just one of my favorites to make to do.
So once a year, how many barrels do you make of this?
So it's usually less than 10 barrels a year that we're making.
Oh wow. All right. Limited production as well.
Yeah.
And 9 states, if I heard you right, 9 states, including
Nine
Europe.
states.
What the heck?
The rye doesn't get distributed. We can ship it anywhere. So we if you go to our website ironcladdistillery.com, we can ship it to you pretty much any state in the United States. So but it doesn't get distributed because it's such limited release, and it does. People in Virginia, at our tasting rooms, they would revolt if it didn't, when it goes away for after it sells out, people are champing at the bit until March when it gets released again.
I love hearing your success there. Like when you're talking about revolts, which sounds like another really great name for a new line. If are you using the name Revolt, by the way?
We will have to look into that for our next one.
Yeah, I want credit somehow, please.
I'll put a little asterisk at the bottom that says Dan.
Yeah, I love it. I'm just joking, but that would be I would you know what you would win it. You would win me for life.
There we
Um,
go.
all right, I'm an Ironclad Vessel Craft Coffee
All
Corp.
right. So this one, this is a this is our small batch bourbon or our straight bourbon that is finished in a barrel that aged coffee beans. And so what we do there is we age our bourbon in a barrel. We take that bourbon out of the barrel. We give that barrel to a coffee roaster in Norfolk, Virginia. They age their coffee beans in the used bourbon barrel. So now their coffee beans pick up all that nice bourbon flavor. And then what would they do after that is they take their coffee beans out, and all those oils from those coffee beans have leached into the staves of the wood. Now, when we put our bourbon back in there, we're not adding any coffee flavor or anything like that. But now that wood has picked up new characteristics from aging something other than whiskey. So on the nose on this one, this one is kept at cask strength, so I believe it's 126 proof. It is unadulterated bourbon and coffee. There's no subtlety here. It's just bourbon and coffee, and that was the goal for this one. I wanted it to just taste like bourbon and coffee.
Why was that the goal? Like, what was it about bourbon and coffee for you? Is it like putting it in your morning coffee or
So
something else?
I always say this is the one you put into your morning coffee, and people wonder why you're so much happier at work. Um, but no, the goal was I'm not a coffee drinker. But this whiskey, this bourbon, has all the characteristics about coffee that I like. It's got the aroma. It doesn't have the bitterness. It's got the sweetness from the whiskey and the coffee combined. So it's those things together that made it what I wanted it to be.
All right, I took a sniff while you were talking and went, oh my God, was my response. This smells absolutely delicious. Not what I was expecting. Because, for me, I'm expecting more just straight up coffee smell. And we'll see what the tastes like. But uh, this has like a really sweet coffee, almost like a praline smell to me, like aperitif, almost from a smell perspective.
Yeah, like I was saying, it's doesn't have the bitterness of the coffee, but it's got that sweetness from that the combination of bourbon and coffee.
And really soft as well. Uh, there's something else for me that's lingering in the background that um, is like a really smooth, velvety smell. I can't identify it, but it's got that mix of coffee sweetness, and there's something like a velvety. I almost would say a vanilla, almost, but it's not super strong. Yeah.
Definitely vanilla. So this is also great over vanilla ice cream. And then the cool thing about it is if you take this bourbon, so they do a really dark roast on these beans. And so with that dark roasting, when you put it over, you can put a couple drops of water in it, or you put it over an ice cube. When you drink it, it opens it up to these like really nice and strong dark chocolate notes, like 70% dark chocolate, and it completely changes it altogether. It's really different and unique.
And it's really easy to drink for what'd you say, 126 proof?
126, yeah,
Oh my God, this is trouble. Trouble. Initial for me after taking a sip is like there's no burn up front. The burn is all at the end. I can feel it down in my belly, warming me up, but it's not harsh in any way. Um, again, like that oil, nice. It's not gross oil in any way, right? Like this is a nice coating of the of flavors across the mouth. Um,
yeah.
yeah, this is really, really good. Good job. Is this also limited production run?
So we have it year round for the most part, but it is we're only doing maybe 8 to 10 barrels of it a year, just because the coffee roaster we use is small, so they can't afford to fill tons of barrels with coffee beans. I mean, although the bourbon barrel aged coffee for them is a huge seller. Every time they make it, it sells out very quickly. But yeah, so it works out really well for them, and also it works out great for us as well.
I know you're doing local source, but if you ever want to expand your coffee beans and not to you know, not ruin any relationship at all. But I have some local friends that do
I'm sh-
coffee roasting, etc. So like maybe you could do an East Coast Virginia and then maybe a West Coast
You mean to
like.
tell me there's coffee roasters in Portland? I don't believe it.
They are also small batch, just FYI, so it would work great for you.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
All right, moving on. I'm getting a little silly already. I already opened this one up. This is the one we just had. So the last but not least, which I am probably the most intrigued about, is the Ironclad Blueberry Mead Cask.
So this one, there's a meadery in Williamsburg, Virginia. And so they're called Silverhand Mead. And so what they do is they make this blueberry mead. And we were discussing like what we could do as a collaboration together. And they said, we make this blueberry mead, and we thought it would age well in a bourbon barrel. I was like, yep, it would. Let me give you some barrels. And so I gave them these barrels on the stipulation that when they're done with them, they give them back to me so I can finish my bourbon in them. And so this is the third release we've done of this one. It's really cool because it's something way different and way out there. Like this is what I was talking about, where I don't know how many other distilleries have finished a bourbon in a blueberry mead cask. And so I love it because you get that fermented honey flavor on the front end. And then as it finishes, I wouldn't necessarily point it and say that's blueberry, but I would say it's a very fruity, bright fruit finish. It's very unique, very different. It makes a hell of an old fashioned, because the more if you add like Angostura bitters or orange bitters, it only brings out that more fruitiness to that whiskey, and it's just something very fun, different, unique, and I love it.
I'm super excited to try it. I would bet nobody else does a blueberry mead. I've never even had a blueberry mead, let alone like heard of a blueberry mead bourbon. Um, So I'm excited. I have not cheated. I have not sniffed this or anything. So I'm gonna dive in real quick. I definitely get a honey off the smell. I don't smell blueberry at all.
No, I don't necessarily get the fruitiness all comes from the palate. I don't really get any of it on the nose.
Yeah, this almost smells back to the straight bourbon smell, right? Is that what you're
Definitely.
using as the source
Yep,
bourbon in it? Okay.
correct. Yeah.
Wow, I'm surprising myself.
You got it, man.
What do you do normally with your barrels? Because once you've made a batch, you're probably not reusing those, right?
Yeah, so one of the bourbon rules is you can't use a barrel again for a second time. It has to be new charred oak every time. So that is the most expensive ingredient in bourbon making. And a lot of our barrels, when we're done with them, we have a brokerage out of Pennsylvania that sells them to all over the country to breweries, wineries, other distilleries, cideries, all things like that. We also we sell them a bunch at our distillery for local home brewers or people who want furniture and blah 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 things like that. But another big part of our business is I like doing finished whiskeys. I like trying to find different things out there. It says you have to be aged, it has to be aged in new charred oak virgin barrels, and that's true. But it doesn't say you can't finish in a second barrel. So a lot of my barrels, like the coffee, like the blueberry mead, we have a hot honey, we have a regular honey, we have a what else do we have? We have a tawny port.
Wait a minute. You said hot honey. Wait a minute. You said hot honey. I want to try hot honey so bad. And what would you? I mean, it's kind of funny when I've asked people like, what would they pair with whiskey, and they're like, well, I'm a purist. Like you just drink it straight. But hot honey sounds like it has to be paired with something, which I don't think.
Uh,
I don't know if it's necessarily what's in my head right now. But what do you think?
so I mean, our hot honey finished bourbon is super different, super unique, super awesome. It is honey up front, and it actually has a capsaicin sensation on the back end, and it makes awesome. If you have a cold coming on, you drink a couple hot toddies with the hot honey in there, and you are cured. Or or you just don't remember you have a cold. It's one of the two. Um, but
Maybe you
it
want to have a cold, and you're like, I'm just.
exactly. It's a great whiskey to cook with as well because all those flavors come through. So if you're making a braised chicken or some sort of steak dish, it goes great in that too because it adds a depth of flavor to it that you can't necessarily get out of other things. The honey itself that is barrel aged is spectacular over vanilla ice cream. Also amazing on pizza. It's a really cool, very different, unique whiskey that I love. That was an experiment that just happened to work out.
Really want to try that just to try this blueberry, by the way. So I've already finished mine. While you were talking, I got a little bit left. But the thing that immediately comes to my head is it's like fireworks in my mouth. There's an explosion of flavor for also being 101 proof, this feels stronger
Yeah,
than.
I know. The coffee you just drank at 126.
Yeah, the coffee was way more milder than this. Like this was like boo 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 all over my mouth from the moment it entered. Really, and again, you say blueberry, but I don't, like you said, I don't taste blueberry at all. It's a really good mix of again, I taste that straight bourbon in there, but a little bit more complexity going on there. And my mouth is really warm from it. Also, again, not as oily as the other
Yeah,
past three that I've had. A little bit more cleaner, but the lingering impact of it from a spice is definitely there
yeah,
for me. Yeah, really good. How many? So, like we've talked about hot honey, blueberry. We've got. I'm going to go back through these real quick. We've got the vessel. We've got the betrayal. We've got the bottled and the straight, and then we also have a new one which I already forgot about. So I don't know if I deserve the the what was the new one we talked about?
the hot honey one.
No, the name that I just came up with.
Oh, you mean Revolt?
Revolt. Yes. We need the Revolt one as well. But how many different blends do you have?
Um, so you don't even have half. I think in total I have maybe 12 or so. I don't know. I lose count of how many different ones I have. But we have a lot of seasonal bourbons that obviously come out at different times of the year. We and then there's even more aging that it hasn't even been released yet of some heirloom varietals of corn and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot, and it's that. I mean, because I could sit there and make our 4 grain recipe every day, and I'd be happy because I do love that bourbon. But the part of the fun part for me is being able to go out and do and make different things that I haven't made before, because it's always a different challenge. I mean, making rye is a lot more challenging than making bourbon, and I wanted to do that because I wanted to say I made a rye. Because it's notoriously, talk to any distiller, making rye is like distilling glue. It's a very glutinous, very starchy grain that is just incredibly difficult to work with. And so I just want to try new things and make different things to see if we can make the world's best bourbon, because that's in the end that's the goal.
You are keeping very busy creating that mini. Like one, you have to be beyond your 500 gallon distillation process now. Where are you at now? How many
So we have 8 distillate. So we run this still twice a day. So we have 8 distillations a week.
you talked about some new releases coming up. That's what I'm curious about is can you share what is new? Well, before we get there, what is your favorite one that you have uh that you've done?
Well, it's like picking a favorite child. You can't just say that out loud, and then all the other ones will be jealous. I mean, the one I drink the most of is, I love our straight bourbon. I love. I mean, I think it's a great bourbon. I could drink it every day. I'd be happy with it. When we release a bottled and bond every year, I it's my favorite time when I get to go up and taste all those barrels, because I get to taste some of the best bourbon I've ever put out every time, and that's always exciting for me. We have another one that comes out in November. It's called our Old Colonel, and it's made with an Indian corn that we get from the eastern shore of Virginia. Now they can date it back. The first time this corn grew in Virginia was about 1865. And this corn is so different, so unique. It's way different than what yellow field corn is, because it's not this genetically modified, super efficient corn. Which, there's nothing wrong with yellow field corn. It makes great bourbon, makes great whiskey. But this is better than that. And so every time I get to make that, it's always a lot of fun, because it's so different than what yellow corn is. And our yield drops on it when we distill, which, every time, which is fine. I mean, I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of distillate for more flavor. And so when we get to release that one, it's always the one that I'm just like, oh, I love this bourbon so much.
And so obviously you've released that before. Is that once a year type of thing or how
It's
many?
every November we release it. Or sorry, every October we release it. But yeah, it's always the one that I look forward to the most.
I would love to try that one as well someday. I'm going to look at your website and see if I can order some up. Um, what do you have coming down the pipeline that you've never released? Is there something you can share around that?
So we have 3 other heirloom varietals of corn that we've never released. We have a Bloody Butcher, which is just a red corn. We have it's called a Hickory King, which is this super big white corn kernel that was actually, I supposedly back in 1800s, or early, yeah, I guess probably 1800s. It was a corn that was pretty much made for making bourbon or making whiskey. So I'm really excited about that one. That one's coming up here very soon. And then we have another one. What I have to try to think of the name of it. Uh,
Revolt. It's called Revolt.
Revolt. It's called Wapsie Valley corn. And that one is it's another Indian corn. Um, that is also very different and very unique. That I when it was coming off the still as just an unaged spirit, I was like, wow, this is really cool. And if it's tasting that good coming off the still, oak is only going to enhance it because we're getting about 70% of our flavor just from those oak barrels. So if we're already starting out with tons of flavor and oak's going to add 70% more to that, then we're already at a great point.
That's amazing. And honestly, again, going back to like, the blueberry mead, I don't know if I've ever heard of anybody say they're using Indian corn either in their distillation process. So kudos to you on that. What made you what made you think of doing that?
Like I said earlier, is I just love showcasing Virginia agriculture, and we have some really amazing farmers here that are growing that are keeping traditions alive of growing these grains, and traditionally every farmer had a still. At the end of the year, whatever grain they couldn't sell, they would mash up and make into spirits. And so, I mean, mine's slightly more elevated than that, but it's the same kind of idea that I want to continue, same tradition that I kind of like carrying on, where finding these farmers who are growing these very unique grains and making whiskey out of them.
Is there a name for taking the old grain that they didn't sell and making that into whiskey or bourbon?
I think it's called bootlegging.
That's only if they sell it, right? I feel like they'd be just drinking it all themselves, right?
That was what's it called? Heat for the winter.
Yeah, like it's happy juice.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't sell it, but I'm at least getting really happy off of what
Yeah.
I did sell. All right.
The only possible way to deal with farming.
Yeah, well,
Keep
especially
your
today,
sanity while
right?
farming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so I got one more question because I know your bread and breakfast building is super old. You mentioned like when was it built?
1793.
1793. There has got to be some like you've been there 4 months, some type of myths, wives' tales, stories around the building. Is there anything kind of cool, fun that you can share with that?
So apparently there are three ghosts that live at the bed and breakfast, and so there's the general. I think it's either the general or the colonel. And the general and the colonel, whichever one it is, he stays by the bar, and that's if you need to find him, that's where he is. Then there's I think it's called Speedy, and Speedy is the one that you think you saw, but he's super fast. And then there's a third. I can't remember the third's name, but the third is also up in the either in the ballroom or the up in the hallways. But yeah, so those are the three ghosts that supposedly live there. I haven't had any experiences with them personally. My sister has said she's seen Mr. Speedy. But yeah, those are the three that apparently are there, but they're very nice ghosts.
It sounds like an opportunity to sit down, open up a bottle, go into the wee hours and see if you can make some new friends.
Well, if you drink enough of it, you'll definitely see something.
That's right. You're purposely looking, right? Like, oh.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh,
Whether you're seeing double or triple, you're seeing something.
yeah. Okay, so like you mentioned cocktails with the coffee being one. One question I love to ask people is what is a unique cocktail maybe people have not heard of or thought of, or maybe something you really love around using your bourbon in that you could recommend to the people watching this? And then afterwards, I'm going to ask you for that recipe so I can share it up on Instagram. So those of you watching right now, look for later, hopefully today, a quick reel that I can share.
Since it's the summertime, but this cocktail really is good year round. We call this one the Maritime Sour. And so what we do is we take our small batch or our straight bourbon, take an ounce of that, 2 ounces of that. Then you take 2 ounces of fresh lemon juice, has to be fresh lemon juice. And then you make a quick simple syrup. of passion fruit juice. And it has to be the super tart passion fruit juice. The stuff that you can feel it in your jaw. It's that tart. And you do 2 parts sugar, 1 part passion fruit juice. Make it a little simple syrup, and then you have your passion fruit simple syrup, you have your fresh lemon juice, and you have your bourbon. And so you do equal parts of each one of those. So you go equal parts, so 2 parts bourbon, 2 parts simple, the passion fruit simple, and 2 parts of lemon juice. You shake that up. If you want to put a little egg white in there, I'm not going to judge. I think that's a great idea. And you shake that up, stir or shake it up, strain it over top of a ice cube, maybe a couple dashes of Angostura bitters if you're feeling froggy. It'll make it look really pretty, and you have yourself the best whiskey sour you will ever have. Because you're going to have that tartness of the passion fruit, but the passion fruit itself has this really nice sweetness to it. It's going to be a great whiskey sour.
My mouth is salivating as you're describing that. I think yours was too for a second. That sounds
I was just
amazing.
thinking about how much I love that drink.
You're going to make one later, aren't you?
Yes, definitely.
All right. So before we wrap up, I want to just give you that opportunity. Is there anything else you want to share about Ironclad or upcoming events that people could look forward to?
I hope everyone joins us at the bed and breakfast in Fredericksburg. It's called the Ironclad Inn. You can find it at ironcladdistillery.com, or if you want to follow us on social media, Ironclad Distillery or Ironclad Inn. Both are on Instagram and Facebook. We hope to see you guys and drink some whiskey with you soon.
Owen King, thank you so much for joining us today. What a great time. I really enjoyed it. You sent a lot of samples, and I'm feeling really good right now. And everybody, thank you for watching. Appreciate you, Owen.
Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate having me on.